Hello and welcome everyone. The sketchbook that I'm going to show to you today is my first sketchbook full of plein air paintings, landscape sketches that I did this summer. So I've always wanted to try out plein air sketching, and then this summer I decided I'd finally do it and try it out. And so this sketchbook is a mix of paintings that are truly plein air that I've done outside, set up my easel and, took a good look at the landscape and then tried to paint it. And the other half, or maybe even more than half of it, are sketches from reference photos that I took outside and that I did back at the studio. And I have to say, I find both of these things challenging, and I think both of them have a place. And for me at this point, it's more about learning how to see and paint light. So I'm happy with either the real landscape in front of me or the reference photo if I know what the situation looked like. I usually take a good look at the landscape that I'm in, and then I have my photo for me to work from back at home. And I tried a few different things with my palette. So I tried working with gouache, using fresh gouache tubes, which is lovely to paint with, but it was not very practical for me, because usually when I'm out painting, it's early in the mornings. That's when I have the time for it, and it was often quite cool and damp weather still, and even in the summer heat. And this meant that my gouache paintings with these thick, lush brush strokes would take ages to dry. And so I went back to watercolor and I brought this little field kit, which is the one that I also use for nature journaling when I'm outside. So you can see this has a pretty basic, pretty classic selection of colors. And one thing that I've added to this is this white gouache. So this, if you add this to any of your other paints, this will make them opaque, and you essentially have a watercolor and gouache kit right here in complete. So watercolor still has a bit of a drying time, but when I'm layering this in thin layers, it's much easier to work with for me outside. I'm sure I will come back to painting with gouache exclusively at some point. It's a lot of fun. I'd really like to learn more about it, but for the time being, I've settled on this little watercolor field kit. So let's start with my sketchbook tour. This is one of the first images that I painted outside. So my first plein air painting, and you can see it's almost an abstract. It has a very flat quality. I was struggling a little bit with the setup and the drying times, as I mentioned. Gouache at 7 a.m. on a damp morning. The layers took about 15 minutes to dry per layer. So I kept things very basic, and yes, it was a little bit nerve-wracking for me painting for the first time outside. I was much more nervous than if I was just sketching outside with a sketchbook and a pencil. So I often go out for nature journaling, and I'm much more at ease with this than when I'm painting outside. And I also found I'm not really able to hold a conversation. So people came up to me and asked what I was doing, so I can't really paint that well while I'm talking to someone. Here is another one of these early ones done in the park in the morning with this early sun, and another really almost abstract painting. Here's another one of these early paintings, and what I like to do when I paint outside is to simplify the scene as much as I can. So I try to work with big brushes, so something like this or an even bigger brush. So I have one that's almost an inch flat. I like to start with these, and then when I come to the details, I switch to the smaller round brushes, or sometimes I bring colored pencils with me to draw in the finer details. So this is really the key that I learned about landscape painting, that you have to arrange your painting with these simple shapes and forms that give your painting a structure, and only when you have established these, then you can add over this and paint the details in. Here's one that I did from a reference photo. This is Cornwall in England. So I was there. I remember what this felt like, what the light looked like when I was on that hiking trail. And I decided to paint this. And I am still trying to find a balance between texture and detail and having these textured brush strokes and just indicating the sort of landmarks here. Often when you've laid down a textured brush strokes like down here, you don't need a lot of detail and you'll get a nice abstracted little sketch. And I try to keep my painting sessions roughly under an hour, because usually when you're sketching outside, then the light will change, and it will likely have changed in an hour, and then the moment is gone and you have no reference to paint from. Of course, I did have a reference in this case, but I still like to treat these references with the same technique and try to work fast. So here's another example for this fast technique, just going in and blocking in these really big shapes and these areas of light, and then adding a few details, and even these are worked in very quickly. And then when you have something like a sunset or a sunrise in this case, then you don't have a lot of time. So in a quarter of an hour, this situation will have changed completely. This really challenges you to keep working fast. Here's another one of these situations in the early morning where the sunlight hits this building, and 10 minutes later all of this was lit and light, and the light quality had totally changed. So I'm still working on my brush technique. So how can I get these textures with the least amount of brush work? And this is obviously something that's also really challenging when you use gouache. One thing that really pays off when you do it are black and white studies or small color studies before you jump into a painting. And so even for this small sketchbook size, it's really beneficial to do these small studies. I have to admit I don't do this often enough. And basically you could also do something like this where you do pencil studies, so this is even smaller. And I find if you have the values in the right place, then you can do whatever you like with your color. So right values in a painting matter much more than choosing the exact colors in a scene. And this is why you can change and tweak the colors in your painting a little bit to get the mood and the atmosphere that you want to convey. So maybe choosing warmer colors than you would actually see in this grass, and choosing cooler colors and low contrast colors in the back, because that's what you usually see in the back of a scene. And so these sort of small value studies are really helpful to get to the sort of essence of a scene. Here's another painting that I did after I did a value study, and I was able to really tweak the colors a little bit better than I would have been otherwise. So I'm still in my learning phase, in the beginner stage of learning all of this and really struggling with the materials. But in some of my more recent sketches, I can already see what a big role lighting can play in the mood of a painting. And you will not be able to light a scene by simply copying from a snapshot photo. So you will need to modify what you see in reality into painter logic, so to speak. And it really takes a while to see the different colors and color temperatures in a scene. And you have to learn, how light falls, how it acts when it falls on a surface, what this means for shadows and for bounce lights and for stuff like that. And it really takes a while to learn this and to see these different colors and temperatures. And so I'm still learning this too, but it's a lot of fun. You can see more of this here. And here. And once I had filled my sketchbook, I changed to a smaller one that I had still around. So all of these are self-made sketchbooks. And in this one, I used a different paper. This is Arches hot pressed paper. And so this works a little bit differently. It handles the paint a bit differently. It's a bit more slippery. So I have to say, for this paper from the first sketchbook, this is cold pressed paper. It's cotton paper, and it has a very prominent. The cotton fibers in here are very prominent, and this often hindered my ability to perform smooth brush strokes. So a lot of the struggles that I had with the materials in the beginning might have come from that paper, or maybe it was just me being a beginner. But with this paper, painting was really different. I'd not say particularly a lot better, but really different. I'm used to this paper when I'm painting botanical or wildlife paintings, so I know how to work with this. So as I said, hot pressed paper can be a little bit slippery, and in some places I had problems to achieve really good layers. But if you use gouache, opaque paint, it doesn't really seem to matter which paper you use. And I have had really good results also on cheap paper. But with watercolor, it can be a little bit difficult, particularly if you have very thin diluted paint. So in this paper, you can see my brush strokes are getting a bit looser. Everything is a bit more fluid and a bit more sketchy if you want. So this is the last proper painting that I did. And yeah, I'm on to more plein air adventures. So I hope you've enjoyed this insight into my first plein air painting adventures. If there's anything you'd like to know more about, then let me know. I'm having a lot of fun learning this stuff, and I hope I can keep this new plein air painting routine active. I always bring this small sketchbook with me and my small field palette, and so I'm I'm just very mobile with this. If I don't have space for anything else, then at the least I will bring a sketchbook and a pencil, and I will do pencil studies. So I'm hoping I can paint a lot more outside in the coming months and years. It's a great way for practicing other painting skills and generally drawing skills, and I'm learning a lot. So I hope you found this useful. As I said, if you have any questions, then feel free to leave me a comment. Also, make sure to subscribe to my channel if you want to get notified about updates, then activate the bell icon. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you very soon. And until then, happy sketching.